So as you see on the program, we have over here some long QT syndrome patient's perspective. We realize that we replace talk on therapy with sport comments from Dr. Rosero, but we will definitely do after that step the therapy too. So we wanted to hear from you about your experience, about your thoughts on dealing with the disease. So if you would be willing to speak, I know that Chris already communicated with few of our guests. We'll be happy to hear you now. Not sure who will be first, but maybe Kate. Yes.
That's fine, sure.
That's good. So I hope she will come with Desiree, meaning her beautiful dog.
Sure, I can do that.
You want to speak here?
Do you want me to stand?
You can do here, will be easy for you probably, especially with small dog. I can take this one. If you want to put him maybe here or too high.
Hi, this is Desiree. Yes, now you all know. Testing? Yeah, I always do that. I always wanted to. I know it. Okay, it works. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine, Cat for short. My last name is Palm, like the tree. I am deaf, as you can see that, obviously. But I am deaf because I was born with Jarvell Lang's Jarvell Lang Nielsen syndrome. Basically, that means that both of my parents have a long QT gene and gave it to me, which means I automatically became deaf. My family didn't know that when I was born. They did not know I was deaf until I was about a year old. The hospital didn't have standard hearing testing at that time, back in 1993. So my mom came to notice that I wasn't hearing specific things and took me to be tested and found out that I was deaf. So we began learning ASL and have used ASL since then. About 4 or 5 years old, my family again noticed there were some signs of me passing out, or maybe something odd happens and I would become scared and refuse to do anything after that. Even Duck Duck Goose, I wouldn't play that because I was scared and I couldn't explain it, but my mom noticed some different things like that. And at some point, she had had enough of it and decided to call the doctor for some more testing. I ended up in the hospital and did get an EKG, and they found that I did have long QT. But the big plot twist is I have a twin brother who is also deaf. So the doctor said that my brother had the same thing. JLNS also, and long QT. My brother's name is Ian, and so he also had both of these. That was probably the hardest transition for my family because heart issues with deaf children, it's maybe a little bit more difficult sometimes. It can be difficult to communicate. And then after we found out that both of us had both syndromes, I got, like everything changed at that time. And then I was 6, I got a pacemaker and a defibrillator. The doctor said that I should be able to do, general kid things like sports and things, but that was not the case. I had various episodes, syncope episodes, and I wasn't able to participate. My brother Ian experienced the same things. We tried to do different things and realized that it wasn't the best for us. And we kind of took turns. For example, I would play sports or chasing other kids, and I'd be doing that, and I'd pass out. Excuse me one moment. Lay down. I just got her 2 months ago, so she's not perfect just yet. So I passed out during chase, and that scared Ian. Ian saw what happened, scared him. And then a few months later, he passed out, which then would scare me, and I saw what happened to him to cause him to pass out. So we would kind of take turns experiencing these things and learning from the activities. And so we would end up going to the ER repeatedly. And we eventually became scared of pretty much everything. We refused to leave the house. We didn't want to do that. And we were fine with that being our situation for the rest of our life. But everyone's like, hey, what about college? Where are you going to go? And I'm like, hey, no, hell no, not going to college. I'm staying home. That's that. This is my place. This is where I'm staying. That's where I belong. Now, my family had a yellow lab, and that dog always wanted to help me. But my family would try and keep us apart a little bit some. But there was one time the dog came up to me, and the first time it happened, I didn't pass out. And that's when my mom became aware that, a dog could help me. And, not medicine, not the defibrillator, a dog. A dog was helpful. And we found that out at 15, when I was 15. And I didn't really want a dog. I felt like I had to take care of the dog all by myself. I had to be responsible. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be overwhelmed with all that responsibility. And also, to be honest, this big dog would have big poop. I didn't want that. So, as you can see, I have a tiny dog now. Lucky me. But for the first month after I got my service dog, Maddie, my first service dog, I was scared to do anything, but the dog would just kind of walk around me. I wouldn't leave the house. We didn't leave the house. I didn't want to. I wasn't sure how I was going to take care of the dog, how I was going to take care of myself, if we left the house, what we would do. So I took baby steps and realized taking care of the dog helped me take care of myself, which gave me the confidence that I needed to be able to go out of the house. After that, I went to college here at RIT, here in Rochester. And my home is in Wisconsin. That's where I'm from. So I came here, Rochester, stayed at RIT for 4 years, graduated. I traveled around the U.S. and around the world. I gotten my master's degree now, and here I am. Service dogs. Oh, they've gave me such the confidence that I needed. And this is my little rock. That's what I call her. She's my rock. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Any questions for our speaker? So it looks like not only beta blockers and not only defibrillator, but dogs. So as in every disease, there is need for family. As you know, there are a number of studies, and we've done a couple of those, whether living alone after heart attack versus having partner, wife, husband is different. Yes, there are substantial data showing. The same with dogs. I'm speaking about not dogs in long QT because we don't have such study. Also, maybe we should launch one. We studied this in heart attack survivors. They also, yeah, yeah. So they also do much better with the pets. So altogether, this is another good solution for this type of approach. So think about dogs too, yes, especially for kids. That's right. Yes, please.
Did the dog ever lick her face when she had syncope?
She was unconscious, so she didn't know.
Would, but I have not had syncope episodes since I got my service dogs. But she is trained to bark if I do fall or pass out so that she can get someone to come and help. So I'm basically never alone because I have her with me and she will get someone to come help. That answer your question? Good. Anyone else? Questions? You can ask me more later if you'd like to. That's fine.
I understand that Adrian was willing to say a few words, yes?
Thanks. I'm not as extroverted as Kat, so I'm going to stay over here. So I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old. I've received it genetically from my mother, who was extremely symptomatic throughout her life. I think she said hers started when she was a teenager and continued. I have 2 mutations of long QT2, but I was diagnosed at 8 with an EKG, and back then that would have been basically in the 90s, the very early 90s, they didn't know that there were even more than one type. So they told me, don't watch scary movies, don't go on roller coasters, don't play competitive sports, don't run or you'll die. And so I took that to heart as a small kid. When I got to be 18, I took a stress test, and they were like, oh, actually, your interval gets shorter, so that's cool. And I was like, what does that even mean? And I got very angry at doctors for a while. And then ended up not having any events until I was 33. When I was 33, I had had a very exhausting day, and I'd been moving a lot of stuff on a very hot day in August from a 3rd floor apartment. And it was the first night at this new place, and then I got startled awake. I stood up, and then I passed out, and then I woke up face flat on the floor. And I knew I had long QT, but I mean, we weren't really sure if that was why, so stupidly didn't go to the emergency room or anything like that, but just kind of assumed it was low blood pressure because I'd always had low blood pressure. So between then and the end of the year, I hit my high deductible. So I got on December 28th, I got my ICD put in, which was really made my insurance company angry, which made me very happy. And then, kind of lived with the thought, my cardiologists were like, oh, well, maybe it probably will never go off. Don't worry about it. But, you got it now, so you're protected. So, so then was it November of 2016, I was coming back from Japan. I hadn't slept a lot. I ended up having strep throat, and I went to bed, and then I woke up to a nightmare of feeling like a rocket hit my chest and my defibrillator had gone off, and that was the first time. And then it would be 8 months later, I had a second event after that was just done through pacing. But then 8 months later, I would go into VF again, and this one I died by doorbell. So that one makes me really sad because who wants that on their tombstone, right? Like death by doorbell? Yes, dark humor is going to be a thing. It's okay. You can laugh. So that was an event that happened by doorbell, but that one was weird because the doorbell went off and I didn't get out of bed, and then it went off again, and I was like, I guess I should get up, but I was able that time to get up, walk around my bed, then I knew something was happening, and I started blacking out and woke up, and I knew my defibrillator had gone off and went to the ED. And then 5 months after that, so last December, I had another event, and after that, I ended up going out on disability because I just can't even life anymore. I was at work, I was like laying on the floor because I couldn't stand up because I was so exhausted. And I was like, this is you're probably done. So in February of last year, and I don't know if it makes anybody feel any better, like I have 2 mutations, so statistically the probability of anyone else having what's happened to me is not as likely. So don't anybody who has long QT2, don't be freaking out right now. But since then I've gone on, one of the times I had low potassium, and one of the times I had low magnesium, so I'm on magnesium, potassium, I'm on fish oil, and after the last 2 events, because I had a cardiac event, and then a week later I had, the defibrillator event, and a week later I had a pacing event. So after that, I just went on to Mexilotine, which I had been having, on your defibrillator you have, when it goes off, your defibrillations, and you have pacing events, and then you have non-sustained events. So I was having between 10 and 20 non-sustained, like events that it watches, but nothing has happened, but nothing continues to happen. It's not sustained. So I'd been having 10 to 20, but since being on Mexilotine, I haven't had any, which has been great, and it's been 9 months, so this is pretty exciting for me, because this is the longest since this all started, really, that I haven't had an event. Those drugs have a lot of side effects, so I'm hoping that someday down the line, they will be able to, all the wonderful doctors will figure some other therapy out that doesn't have quite the side effects, because it's playing with your heart's electrical system. So I have fun things like blurred speech, blurred vision, or slurred speech and blurred vision, and trouble walking, like a lot of gastrointestinal problems, and just it's short-term memory problems, which I've noticed since I've started taking it. I was able to reduce it a little bit, which has been nice, but it's still present, and that makes a lot of things a lot harder. But as they've said, when you have a good treatment plan, it does get better. It's just you have to figure out where your actual level of risk is. And I'm really grateful for, I have Dr. Hamer at U of R, and he is wonderful. And he, throughout the whole way, it was always a conversation. It wasn't anybody telling me that what I needed to do, or that it had to, well, I had a cardiologist like that, and I immediately stopped having that cardiologist, and then found one who would have more of a conversation and figure out what we could do going forward. And he's been right every single time. So I've been very grateful for that. But yeah, so even at worst case scenarios, things can still be okay. And I know if anybody of you have children, it's hard, like living with that kind of omnipresent fear, but it's not terrible, and it doesn't mean that like their lives are any worse. I mean, for anything, to be honest, I think it made my life better, because I never waited to do things, because I always kind of knew that was there, and I didn't really think it was ever going to happen. And then when it did, I still didn't really think it was going to happen again. And I'm finally at the point now where I'm like, okay, it's going to happen again, so I'm going to enjoy every day. But it's also, I know I do feel like we've done all that we can do and to be protected. But for anybody who's like has children who are not symptomatic, it is stressful having it and having nothing happen yet, because there is the yet, and that's always, in your mind, but it's not a death sentence. And I know it sometimes feels that way, but it really isn't, and you can live a good life, especially if you have, good doctors. And in my lifetime, we've figured out since I got diagnosed, and all the advances that they're making have been it's really great to watch, and it's really nice to know that there's so many options, and I'm interested to see where we're gonna go next. Thanks. Yeah. Which thing? Oh yeah. So just if you are a female and you have a defibrillator, I ended up having, after one of my events, I ended up having an underwire burn. Right? Yeah, right? Like that's just, no one ever told me that. Like that's the thing. They were very, at the hospital, they were like, okay, so this will happen like after you get defibrillated, like, oh, you can have sex. And I'm like, I'm not thinking about sex right now. I wish someone had told me like, hey, your underwire might burn you. But yeah, so like there's just a lot of really weird random things that can happen to you, but like that one was out there. I know, right? Like, who would even know that one? But yeah, that's...
Looks like we are learning all the time.
I know, right? Hasn't happened every time, but like the one time it did, I was just like, I'm like, of all the things, like that's an insult to injury that just doesn't need to happen.
Thank you for sharing. So
no
I think
problem.
that some of your points which you raise about difficult to control cardiac arrhythmias will be partially addressed in subsequent talk by Spencer and probably David and Millie. Any comments or questions on what April was kind to share with us?
You said that you were diagnosed when you were 8. At that time, you didn't take any medication or anything?
Oh, so that goes into the history of, so when I was 8, it was on EKG. I had a very, also just for my risk stratification, I hover around 500. I've gone over 500 for corrected QT interval, and I have communications.
But when I was 8, I had a very high QT interval, and at that point I was on propanolol, which has been since been kind of proven through research not to be as helpful for long QT2. But again, when I was 8, we didn't even know long QT2 existed. It wasn't understood. So I was on propanolol for a long time, but when I got to that stress test at 18, I'm gonna be honest, I was so fed up with doctors, like, and everything, and when they said everything they said, because they were like, oh yeah, don't ever exercise, don't ever do anything, and then I tried to do the stress test, and you know, if you've taken a stress test, they're horrible. And like, if you've done nothing except for walk around a football field for your entire gym career, I was a martial artist, but like I still didn't do much. So then I tried to do a stress test, and then them being like, oh yeah, you should exercise more. And I was just like, no, I'm like, don't be angry. So they're like, oh yeah, P.S. lose some weight too. And I was like, oh, don't even make me angry right now. So I got very angry and I dumped all of my meds at that point. I did later on in my later 20s start going back to a cardiologist, and actually I found one that worked for me so that I would actually go like talk to someone. But for me, beta blockers have never been, because I'm in the high risk stratification, because beta blockers don't stop my events. So, I mean, that's also was one of the things, is whether or not they stop your events. And for me, I was not lucky, so. Yeah, and if anyone has either, wants to or wants my contact information, or has like children or teenagers or young adults who would like to talk to someone else who's going with it. I've tried to like amass some friends who also have it, and I know some other people in Rochester, but if anyone wants to, just let me know. I'll give you my email.
Yes. Anybody else is willing to say a few words?
Mary, did you want to go up or stay at your seat? Whatever you want to do. You want to stay here?
I'm afraid of that man. No, I'm not. I'm going to go up. And I know half of you here, not half, at least maybe a third, or I don't know, have heard my story. And I like to face everybody. I don't know why. Whoosh. Let's get out of there. Oh, shoot, I forgot my phone. I was going to time myself. What?
You have time.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mary Hickey. I'm just going to go through my story, and I know one guy here has heard it in Michigan, maybe another couple of people. And I grew up in Chelsea, Vermont. I lived on a dirt road and uninsulated house, no running water, outhouse water from a pump nearby and stuff. And it was just a country living thing for me for 17 years, because we got running water in the house when I was 12 and stuff. But what happened when I was 8, my 13-year-old sister died. Her name was Catherine. I was going to have pictures, but I forgot. So maybe that comes with being a little older, I don't know. And so that was the year my seizures started. There was 4 out of 6 kids. 4 had seizures. I was one of the 4. And when I was 18, my 26-year-old brother died down the road from my mother and father. And he had 2 kids, both with long QT. They found out later. But they didn't know anything at that point. because there was no history of long QT at all anywhere. Um, so then my sister died 2 years after he died. She was 18. And after that, I said, oh, to hell with it all. I'll just keep drinking. I was in Burlington, Vermont, and I just drank for 10 years or plus. And because I figured I was the next one to go, I was pretty depressed with all my life, you know. And somehow I got through that. I lived. And then I ended up getting married, and you know, but there's a lot in it. So anyway, I had my first child when I was 31, and that's when I started having some problems again, and because my seizures had stopped when I was about 16, and then a couple in between, and then after Beth was born, she, I can't remember how old she is now. She's in her 40s somewhere. Anyway, it was probably within a week or two I had what I thought was a seizure, and then it was other things that I know were some sort of heart. It was all heart related. Now that I look back, but I didn't know that then, you know. So I had to go finally into ER. They checked my vitals. They said, you can go home now. And I said, I'm not going home. There's something wrong with my body. So they let me in under psychiatric evaluation. And I was on a regular medical floor. And then within 24 hours, my heart thing started again. And there was one doctor on the floor heard about a hysterical woman. That was me. And then I ended up going up to cardiac, and I knew I was dying, but I was glad that somebody else knew. And by the way, I do have a sense of humor. This doesn't sound it. This story sounds pretty depressing, you know, but it does get better. So I had Dr. Dennis DeSilva as a cardiologist. I'll tell you, that man, I think there was only 2 years worth of knowledge at that point, and he knew I had long QT from reading the EKG chart. And they had to defibrillate a few times and all that stuff. And I couldn't take beta blockers because I have low blood pressure. And so I think he talked with Moss about the surgery that he had done over here. And I ended up in Burlington, had the same thing done. And I have the droopy left eye to prove it from Dr. Moss. Thank you, Dr. Moss. He saved my life, really. And so then the medicine that I ended up on, because I was on too much medicine, they ended up putting me on Primidone, which is a seizure control drug. And between those two, I'm 74 now. So, you know, I got through my drinking thing, and, you know, I finished college. It took me 30 years to get my 4-year degree. You know, bouncing around the place. Never had a career of anything except low-paying jobs and shit like that. Shit, I just swore, didn't I? Oh, well. I'm from Vermont. That's what they do over there. What? Do what I want? Oh my God. I have been. And I get the manager, and I live in a senior housing now, which is kind of weird because I'm in senior housing. What am I doing here? And the manager gets upset at me, and she's in her 30s. What's wrong, you know? Just because I blow in a tube, and other things. And I have been fortunate enough to. I was sitting in my apartment one day, and I said, "What is this feeling I have?" Oh, I think I'm happy. And that took me many years to get to that spot, you know, because I was wandering around alone. And it wasn't until I went to Ann Arbor a year ago that I met other people outside my family that had long QT, and now I meet you folks, you know? And if we had another day, you'd get to know me better, or maybe you'd run away, I'm not sure which. But Rochester has always been, when I get the letter, it's 40-year celebration of the long QT registry, which I always hated getting that damn form through the mail. And it was like, oh, okay, who died, who was born, and then what has happened in your life? It's different, you know? So, I don't know, I kind of like life now, and that's been going on for a while. And I have some good friends and stuff, and good people in my life, and I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. Encouraging story. So I think we'll move forward with our program.